This is something that I think is so important. The whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, and I have to say, in a way, the American right kind of made this monster, and it's now sort of attacking them, where it became like every person who ever talked to Jeffrey Epstein, who ever met Jeffrey Epstein, somehow had suspicion on them that they were a pedophile or had an interest in.
This is no longer damage control. It is a counterstrike collapsing in real time. Everyone believed this empire was untouchable, polished, insulated by money and silence, until the response exposed more than the leak itself. What just surfaced is not a denial, but a reaction. A sudden legal push. Posts disappearing. Major outlets going quiet. And one rival choosing to press harder instead of backing off. All of it unfolding publicly and at speed. Within hours of the Epstein file release, Jay-Z's name spreads through an FBI intake record tied to a 1996 Florida property. Almost immediately, 50 Cent posts that he wants to do a documentary. Then the situation escalates after alleged warnings land. Jay-Z is rumored to be abroad. Beyoncé's follower count reportedly drops by the millions. Silence from their usual media allies becomes absolute. None of this aligns with a story that is supposed to be harmless. The timing is wrong. The reactions are too coordinated. The retreat is too visible. Whatever mechanism has activated here is older, heavier, and already moving toward consequences no statement can stop.
So first, I think we just have to say, and you set it up well, there are two real storylines here. One is what is in these files that we can see and that we can actually learn. We're going to get on that first. There's also the story about what is not in these files or what is heavily redacted, because that is also...
The response inside the Carter circle hardens almost immediately, and that reaction becomes the story. As the Epstein files circulate, people close to the situation say the priority is not clarification but containment, and the signs appear fast. Posts referencing the files begin to vanish. Gossip accounts go quiet. Major outlets that normally sprint toward controversy hesitate or skip it entirely. At the same time, messages move through legal channels instead of public ones. The name most often attached to that pressure is Beyoncé's. Industry sources describe a familiar pattern: suppress the spread, starve the oxygen, remind people where their access comes from. It is the opposite of how an innocent misunderstanding is usually handled. The silence does not feel calm. It feels coordinated, and that coordination becomes impossible to ignore once it collides with someone who has no interest in staying quiet. That collision arrives publicly on January 31st. When 50 Cent posts a blunt reaction to Jay-Z's name appearing in the Epstein material, writing, "Damn, they got your man Jay in the Epstein files. I gotta do a doc on this stuff." The post does not read like curiosity. It reads like provocation. Within hours, memes follow. Then AI imagery. Then mocking captions suggesting he knows exactly which nerves he is hitting. People around him say the tone shifts after alleged legal warnings surface, not softer, but sharper. Instead of backing down, 50 Cent escalates, teasing exposure and daring anyone to stop him. In an industry trained to respond to pressure with compliance, his refusal becomes disruptive by itself. The quiet explanation offered is that Jay-Z's name appears only in an unverified FBI intake record logged in July 2019. Tied to an alleged 1996 incident. No charges. No follow-up. No confirmation. But the reactions do not match that script. Jay-Z does not issue a denial. He does not send representatives into the press cycle. Instead, reports circulate that he leaves the United States, described as temporary by people close to the couple, but never clearly explained. At the same time, analytics accounts claim Beyoncé's online following drops by the millions in a matter of days, a visible sign of public unease her team does not address. These are not the moves of people confident the story will fade on its own.
So what happens now is this is simply a civil complaint. And in a civil complaint, it goes through the technical legal process. Now, the distinction, Jessica, between civil and criminal, of course, is that civil is for monetary damages, right? The system can only reward you with money. There's allegations that this 13-year-old is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, suffered depression, etc. So now you go to...
Here's where the story bends. If the mention is meaningless, why does it trigger such aggressive suppression? If the intake record is unreliable, why not confront it head-on? Insiders note that Beyoncé has spent years building an image of control, precision, and absolute authority over her brand, and this moment tests that machinery. Legal pressure replaces public reassurance. Silence replaces explanation. People who normally speak for the Carters suddenly cannot be reached. Even allies appear hesitant, as if waiting for instruction. The vacuum invites speculation, the very thing containment strategies are meant to prevent. Instead, it grows. What fuels that growth is the contrast between who stays quiet and who does not. 50 Cent keeps posting. He references his recent documentary success dismantling another powerful figure, reminding everyone he knows how to turn allegations into content and attention. He jokes about smelling beef and popcorn, framing the situation as entertainment while making clear he is not intimidated. Industry veterans say this is not random trolling. It is strategic pressure. By refusing to let the conversation fade, 50 Cent forces the Carter response, or lack of one, into sharper focus. Every hour without a statement makes his insinuations heavier. The media landscape amplifies the tension. Fans notice outlets known for breaking celebrity scandals avoiding the story or quietly removing mentions. Screenshots circulate of posts deleted without explanation. People begin asking whether this is coincidence or influence. Beyoncé's name surfaces again and again, not as the subject of the allegation, but as the figure with the leverage to make stories disappear. That perception alone shifts the narrative. The question stops being what happened in 1996 and becomes what is happening now, and who is controlling it.
If we get to the bottom of Tupac's when that is finally revealed, 15 other will be revealed with it. And you will find that they were all committed by the same two people. Father and son.
As the days pass, the rumor of Jay-Z being abroad hardens into accepted fact in online circles, even as no official confirmation appears. People close to the couple insist it is precautionary, but cannot explain why precaution is necessary. Others whisper that leaving the country buys time while lawyers work. None of those explanations account for why the couple does not simply deny the claims outright. The lack of clarity feeds a darker interpretation, that responding publicly risks opening doors better left shut. In that context, Beyoncé's role looks less like protection and more like command, directing a shutdown while hoping the storm passes. By now, the original allegation almost feels secondary to the behavior surrounding it. A single intake record leads to legal warnings, mass silence, social media fallout, and an arrival that openly dares the empire to react. Each piece on its own might be dismissed. Together, they form a pattern that refuses to settle. The more the Carters pull inward, the more space they create for outsiders to define the story. And as 50 Cent continues to poke at that space, the question hanging over everything is no longer whether this will escalate, but how much pressure the system can absorb before something breaks. What starts to surface now is that this moment does not exist in isolation. People inside the industry begin drawing lines backward instead of forward. Epstein's shadow hangs over it not because of one file, but because of what his world represents: powerful figures orbiting private spaces, accusations treated as administrative problems, and reputations preserved through silence and leverage. Insiders point out that the playbook unfolding around the Carters looks familiar to anyone who has watched similar crises before. When proximity becomes dangerous, the priority shifts to minimizing exposure, not addressing substance. That instinct alone reframes the current reaction as learned behavior, not panic. The deeper implication is that this is not the first time these defenses have been tested, only the first time someone with nothing to lose keeps pushing from the outside.
I've gathered from your articles, this seems to be a global network that Epstein was a part of, and I believe there are multiple Epsteins. Like, I don't believe that Jeffrey Epstein was the head of the snake. Yeah, like, you know, they never go after the head of the snake. They never go after
the head of the snake, quote unquote, are just, it's the billionaire class, and so there's a faction of these billionaires in our oligarchy. And of course, the American oligarchy, you know, the American oligarchs don't necessarily, a lot of them don't have an allegiance necessarily to the United States.
As attention widens, older stories that once lived on the margins begin snapping back into focus. For years, whispers have circulated about exclusive gatherings that leave guests unsettled, about environments where power dynamics feel off, about scenes that never quite match the polished public image. None of these rumors gain traction on their own. They linger, dismissed as bitterness or fantasy. But now, with scrutiny back on the Carter orbit, those stories stop floating independently and start clustering. Industry veterans say that when multiple people who never coordinated describe similar discomfort, the instinct is not to prove anything, but to ask why the same themes keep resurfacing. In that context, today's silence feels less like dignity and more like strategy. Beyoncé's history becomes impossible to separate from that strategy. Former collaborators have previously accused her of exerting control in ways that extend beyond contracts and choreography, alleging manipulation, intimidation, and practices they describe as spiritually disturbing. At the time, those claims were waved away as instability or jealousy. Now, they are reinterpreted as early warnings about how power operates inside her circle. People close to her insist she believes absolute control is protection, and that belief informs every move she makes when the brand is threatened. Seen through that lens, the current suppression effort is not reactionary. It is consistent. It is how she has always handled perceived threats. By tightening the perimeter and trusting that silence outlasts noise, the marriage itself begins to look different under pressure. What once sold as a partnership built on loyalty and mutual elevation now reads to skeptics as a mutually assured defense pact. Industry insiders speculate that separation is dangerous, not because of heartbreak, but because of exposure. Staying together means controlling the narrative as a unit. Splitting would fracture that control and invite questions neither side wants answered. That interpretation spreads quickly online, fueling speculation that divorce is not merely unlikely, but impossible. Every public appearance, and every lack of appearance, becomes evidence in a larger theory that the relationship functions as insulation rather than romance.
There's a lot of people, 50, I feel like he don't have to say nothing, but 50's crazy. He's been like this his whole life. When he's on the block, 50's coming.
Meanwhile, the figure who refuses to play by those rules keeps circling. 50 Cent's role shifts in perception from troll to pressure test. People who have worked with him describe his instinct for identifying fear, for recognizing when a reaction signals vulnerability. His history of turning conflict into leverage makes his persistence feel intentional. He is not alleging specifics. He is daring a response. And by doing so, he exposes how constrained his targets really are. Each time he posts, the absence of pushback from the Carters reinforces the sense that they are boxed in by their own silence. The broader industry watches closely because the implications reach beyond one couple. Executives, artists, and power brokers recognize the pattern and quietly assess their own exposure. If a name like Jay-Z can be treated this cautiously, others begin to wonder where they stand. The Epstein files become less about individual allegations and more about a reminder that proximity to that world carries permanent risk. Being mentioned, even indirectly, forces choices that reveal how much someone fears what else might surface. That fear is contagious. It reshapes alliances, freezes commentary, and turns curiosity into compliance.
Dozens of new photos we haven't seen before of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell with very high-profile people, celebrities, people like Mick Jagger and Michael Jackson, like you showed, also like British royalty and actors. All of that we sort of knew was happening. I want to highlight specifically two for the public interest, and that is President Clinton and...
What starts circulating next is a rumor that feels too specific to dismiss and too widespread to ignore. People inside the industry begin whispering that Jay-Z is not an outlier, but a prototype, not in sound or success, but in access, proximity, and protection. Executives, financiers, entertainment power brokers, and cultural gatekeepers who move the same way attend the same off-record gatherings and rely on the same unwritten rules. The conversation is not about fame, but about positioning. These figures rarely appear on stage or red carpets. Yet their influence shapes careers and coverage. The sudden panic is not about one name surfacing, but about the fear that a single crack could expose a larger lattice of relationships that has never faced public scrutiny.
Tonight is a family affair. I saw your mother-in-law so proud of.
Industry sources describe a quiet behavioral shift among these figures in recent weeks. Travel plans change. Assistants are told to screen more aggressively. Digital footprints shrink overnight as old posts, photos, and associations are scrubbed or locked down. Lawyers become the first call instead of publicists. It feels less like coincidence and more like a coordinated retreat. The concern, according to people close to these circles, is not exposure alone, but sequence. If one person loses protection and begins cooperating with federal authorities, the domino effect could be catastrophic. The anxiety is not about guilt or innocence, but about proximity and paper trails that were never meant to see daylight. What makes the rumor stick is how closely it aligns with current behavior. Silence spreads horizontally across unrelated sectors of entertainment, finance, and politics. Commentary dries up. Invitations stop. People who once postured as fearless suddenly avoid even indirect association with controversy. The instinct is not to defend or deny, but to disappear. Observers note that this is how powerful networks behave when they believe attention itself is dangerous, not because every member has something to hide, but because no one knows who might decide that survival means cooperation. In that environment, loyalty becomes fragile, and fear becomes currency.
What do they stand to gain from it? I don't think anyone really knows at this point, because it's very, we have to be kind of speculative here, because we're not going to get like an admission from the Trump administration about what they're actually thinking. They're obviously worried about PR and optics, and they have continued for months to kick this can down the road and try and make...
There is growing speculation that authorities are aware of this dynamic and are waiting, not actively knocking down doors, but letting pressure build while watching who moves first. Sources claim the real threat is not subpoenas, but isolation. Once someone senses they have been cut loose by the network that once protected them, the incentive structure flips. Staying silent stops looking noble and starts looking risky. Turning over information becomes self-preservation. That possibility alone is enough to keep entire rooms quiet, entire industries cautious, and entire careers on pause. This is where the Jay-Z situation begins to feel symbolic rather than singular. His rumored absence, the aggressive containment, and the refusal to engage publicly look less like personal decisions and more like signals sent up the chain, a warning shot to everyone else watching: do not speak, do not speculate, do not draw attention. The fear is that if even one figure miscalculates, the illusion of separation between individual scandal and systemic exposure collapses. And once that line is crossed, there is no controlling who gets pulled into the light next. The most unsettling part is how normalized this fear already feels. People close to the industry say conversations now happen in hypotheticals and coded language, as if everyone understands the stakes without needing them spelled out. The idea that there are hundreds like him is not meant literally, but structurally, hundreds who benefit from the same silence, the same reluctance to document, the same expectation that nothing truly bad ever reaches the surface. The current panic suggests that expectation may be weakening. And that is what terrifies the system more than any single allegation ever could. Meanwhile, public appetite does not fade. Social platforms continue dissecting follower drops, travel rumors, and conspicuous absences. Fans argue over whether this is unfair targeting or long overdue scrutiny. Critics frame the silence as arrogance. Supporters frame it as restraint. Neither side can explain why restraint looks so aggressive, or why protection requires so much coordination. The longer the questions linger unanswered, the more theories harden into belief. In this environment, perception becomes reality faster than facts ever could.
Sometimes you receive more with not doing well than you receive. Might do an excellent pitch.
Yeah, we wouldn't even bring it up.
What makes this moment volatile is that control and chaos are colliding in real time. Beyoncé's instinct is to seal off, to wait it out, to trust influence and fatigue. 50 Cent's instinct is the opposite, to keep poking until something cracks. Jay-Z's instinct appears to be withdrawal and distance, minimizing his physical presence while the storm passes. Those instincts do not align. They grind against each other, creating friction that produces more heat than any single allegation ever could. People close to the situation say the real fear is not what is already known, but what might be forced into the open if this standoff continues. By now, the story feels less like a scandal and more like a stress fracture running through an entire ecosystem. Old rumors, new leaks, strategic silence, and public provocation are all feeding the same unresolved tension. Nothing decisive has happened, yet everything feels unstable. And that instability raises questions that refuse to go away. Is the silence a sign of confidence or containment? Is the marriage protection or a prison? Is 50 Cent bluffing, or is he waiting for the right moment to drop something heavier? And if this is how power reacts to being mentioned, what does that say about what it's afraid of? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments. Pick a side if you want, or challenge both. This story is still moving, and whatever comes next is not going to be quiet.